Greetings, Summoners. Cosmic here, and are you ready to win a stupid, sexy Hydro playmat? Because I know I am. Yes, these Summoner Duels are finally kicking off this weekend. Pro Play Games is hosting theirs, and there's actually a few others that got added to the website, either the past Friday update or the one before that, I forget now. So if you haven't checked it out in a while, please make sure to go check the website and get excited to sign up for one that fits with your time slot in your region. Now, Pro Play Games is open, so if you're from the EU and if you want to deal with the time zone changes, by all means, sign up. More details on the website. You can go ask PPG about it, but this is going to be an open one. We do not know yet if the other tournaments will also be open, but something to consider if you want, well, multiple chances to try and win this playmat. Outside of that, I want to do a quick video and just talk about the changes to Best of One, kind of what to expect and where do we go from there? You know, what are some popular decks to expect and what can we think about from a main deck inclusion that we may not have had in every deck list prior, but after watching this video, you'll definitely understand that you need to have them in every single deck. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of how things have changed, right? So far, we've seen 6 key players, and you know, green won the Italy event. That could be swapped out for white aggro. Just, you know, low to the ground aggro deck in general can fit in that slice, but for what we've seen so far, there's about 6 major archetypes, and going from the 3rd set to the 4th set, and I'm using Exhaust Nexus and Deadly Balance as just key magic examples, we went from this, you know, more play the board, have this go wide, where Exhaust Nexus was really kind of an MVP, right? We've seen the yellow decks really get to dominate because they got the value out of multiple Exhaust Nexus, where now Deadly Balance is actually the best magic in the game and better than it's ever been by a wide margin, just because of things like Hydra and Ira, because of how they impacted the format, and now we just have a much higher focus on couple of spirits closing out the game very, very fast with Ascend. And of course, this is also going to get expanded on in set 5. We already know to expect more Ascends as well as Astrals, which sound like they are going to have a very large impact as well, kind of in the same meta shift that we've seen from set 3 to set 4, but more on that in a future video when those spoilers do start. So with that kind of out of the way in this overall introduction, right, even if we think about where the current meta is at, a lot of the Smag decks are running things like Ira at the high end. Hydra and Ira, of course, can get hit by Deadly Balance where they don't get hit by Double Deadly. And in general, because the games can be over so quick and because we are in a best of one format, you really want to equip yourself with the best chances to target as many decks as possible. And if we know that we're going to be kind of fear of these white aggro decks or green aggro decks because it is a best of one. And sometimes you just high roll and go say, hey, I got the double Valkyrie miss, sorry, or I got the double Thorn Prison, GG, and you just swing for game and you're over in 5 minutes, you get a nice break before your next round, right? So there are different considerations. We have to kind of change things up with how we approach our main deck because now you have to account for kind of everything in this pie and then some of the other fringe decks that have been starting to pop up, like Prey Birds, like Fabled Beasts, that while yes, they're probably more likely tier 2, if they find those lines, they are still going to be able to steal a game in best of one, and you might not be prepared for it. So what are some of like the key magics that you should be including? By far and away, outside of Deadly Balance, the other 2 big ones are going to be Dream Bomb and Floodstream. So Dream Bomb being an MVP here because it can help reset the Ascend, especially if they're playing Ira. They do have to lose their target. Now, of course, the Hydra deck does have a way to get around it thanks to the Sapphire Labyrinth. However, a set Dream Bomb is still going to do a lot of damage if you get it early. And then, of course, with the rise of aggro, you know, everyone had this in their sideboards for best of 3 because, oh, I lost game 1, I can sideboard into Floodstream, and now I know that they're on aggro, so I can mulligan differently. We don't have that luxury anymore, right? So this is where you have to try to change your mindset or even your approach just from a best of 3 to best of 1, where in best of 3, you might look at your opening hand and say, okay, I have a couple play lines. I have at least some early turn consideration, but I might just die on turn 2 if they are playing aggro, where now even if you would have had what is considered a good hand for best of 3, right, you might be forced to just say, well, this does not do anything, or I have no interaction for the aggro decks. I have to throw this away. And that's going to be heartbreaking. And that's kind of one of my main issues with best of 1 on top of some just other, you know, the game itself is truly made for best of 3, is now we have to craft our hands that say, okay, here's my opener. am I just dead to aggro? I guess I got to mulligan it, because if you're going against other decks like Hydra or just smacking other decks in general, right, you're not automatically going to lose on turn 2. So if you have like interaction plus Star Blessed Draw or something of that nature, you have more time to dig yourself out of those scenarios compared to an aggro player who is just going to try to end the game on turn 2. Now again, green aggro and even red aggro are technically a little bit slower, so you have more time against them in general, where white aggro is, sorry, turn 2 or sometimes turn 1 if you misplay, right? You're just out of it. So something to definitely consider. And in that note, I think it's still aggro decks are going to be good because it just forces you to have that answer. And if anyone who's played Battle Spirits for a long enough time, you know that even if you're expecting, even if you watch this video and you go, okay, I have to keep a Floodstream hand, or I have to keep at least a, you know, decent hand with at least one piece of removal, and that's what you're looking for. Even then, if you try to mulligan and you get just nothing, and you're just like, all right, I saw 8 cards, or I guess 9 because you draw, right? I didn't hit it. Okay, I guess I'm out of the entire tournament now because it's best of 1, no top cut. And that feels awful, but what can you do about it? And again, the main purpose of this video was to at least talk about the different decks that we can expect and how some things might change. So we talked a lot about, you know, explosive starts, a lot of good anti-aggro tools just to make sure you can stabilize. So what does that mean for an overall deck consideration, right? Let's get into the actual deck choices, and shocker, right? Hydra. Hydra is still going to be probably the best pick, period, for best of 1 tournament, because you're already on color with things like Pollen getting an early Nexus, which then means you have both of your reductions fulfilled already for Floodstream, and you're able to pay for a lot more efficient value, right? So Pollen can get the early block, you take 1 damage and you go, oh, sorry, Floodstream the rest, right? So it just lines up those plays quite a bit better. Again, this is just one of the lists from the events we had previously, but one thing to note here too, if you don't have frogs, just put in Squallow. I was actually getting to playtest this against some aggro decks. Like, turns out a 5k early blocker that also rams you a core is still just good. So side note, if you are expecting more of an aggressive format, that might be one of the changes that you might want to make. And then on top of that, we also want to consider things like at least 3 Floodstreams. So as I kind of mentioned, in terms of just like, hey, Deadly Balance is good, Dream Bomb is good, Floodstream is good, right? We can already play one of these magics for, you know, the reduced cost, and with the ramp that we're getting from the Nexus, if it all lines up, you at least have an easier time to put the cores together to craft those plays. And then, of course, if by now you've had a chance to play Hydra or play against Hydra, you also know that their mid game is pretty okay. Like, if they just have an okay game, that's fine, then they can still win. But when they hit their high rolls, it's disgusting, and it will close the game very, very fast. So now it gets to the point of, okay, what are the high roll decks that I can just play, and, well, I want to end the game on turn 2, turn 3. Those are going to be the first 3 decks, and then the other ones are just other considerations that I think are still fine because of how they line up with the meta. So overall, I like this list a lot. I expect to see a lot of this Hydra version, you know, make it to the top 8 slots. And again, full transparency, I would not be surprised at all if the entire top 8 is Hydra plus aggro decks. Like, just to be very blunt about it, for a best of 1 format, no top cut, etc., I would not be surprised at all. But that said, Hydra at least does give you a little bit more play. You do have things like Elephant, which can, if you just have like, hey, I want to attack and do Beldegor triggers into Elephant, right? You do still have other lines that allow you to take more aggressive options while still being defensive, because Elephant is going to refresh everything. So overall, I think from a, you know, best of 1 high level standpoint, what's the overall best deck to play, or what's the deck to beat? It is definitely going to be Hydra. So not much more needs to be said about that. Again, I've covered these in more depth in some of the other videos, or again, just time to get sleeved up and get testing. But the one thing I will note here is at least more copies of Floodstream. Moving on from there, we have white aggro. Just one sample list. There's been a couple that have popped up, with some having more green, some having 0 green, and this one has Thorn Prison. But the other card I want to point out, other than like, hey, Valkyrie Mist is good. Hey, Sage is really good. Curiosity actually has the anti-destruction clause, and we have 3 mechas. So for the white aggro players, if you're expecting that everyone's going to have Floodstream, you know, outside of just having, oh, can this hand kill on turn 2 sort of thing, right? You know, something you really want to be mindful of is Curiosity, that the Floodstream is going to force your opponent to use it on their turn just to prevent the damage, but then your guys are still on board. Now, of course, if they have Ice Shield instead, so they can stabilize that way in a Flood Stream. That's going to feel bad, but there are a few ways to get around this. And then we also seen things like the Ants Strike Back as being one choice as well for these white aggro decks, just get a little bit more of an extension. And then if we're doing the new Raging Tides card, which doesn't hit tokens, that might be an option as well. And that's kind of like one of the other main cards that's like out there in the open of how many people are going to be on Raging Tides just to kind of combat all the aggro decks. I think you still want to be on Floodstream just because it, does give you some mid-range. You kill the random Dual Eagle sometimes, right? It can still be useful that way. But if we are expecting the overflowing amount of aggro, then Raging Tides, can also be something to consider. White aggro, you know it, you've seen it. It's been around since set 1 with very minor changes. But low to the ground aggro has the Valkyrie Mist to bounce and get things out of the way. And then I would recommend at least having some number of something like Derm Dyna just to give you the last couple points of unblockable damage. Because again, everyone's playing Nexuses right now and very little Nexus removal, so that Derm Dyna is going to be very live. And a lot of times with white aggro, you get them down to 1 anyways, and you just need that last little bit of damage, and Derm Dyna is absolutely the best way to go. Otherwise, the Librarian Regain Soul Core combo, where because she gets you back the core, you have another core then for Regain, and you just combo out and just do a bunch of attacks in a turn, right? You've seen it. It hurts, but definitely something to consider. It's going to be white aggro for this tournament. I do have to give a special shout out here to green aggro. It again just won the Italy event, so it's definitely top of mind, but also green aggro specifically has the, kind of an increase in playability, if only because they can lean more into the Swift package, right? So what do I mean? In a lot of games, you are going to, especially with white aggro, it is very much, I have to commit to the board. Here's everything that I'm going to do for this turn. I might be holding like a regain, right? But if you can handle my board, this is kind of what you see, what you get. With green aggro, you now have the option, because especially the new 2 free drop that we got, we now have 8 free cards that we can set up swing with, and as our opponent is killing them, we still actually have things like Leaf Wolf or Wave Rider that we can then extend our damage turns with. So no longer is the Flood Stream the end-all be-all, and you might even add a couple more. I think there's the Leaf Wolf, the Scoops, and then the Wave Rider. Right? Okay, yeah. And had to make sure that was the only one I was missing. So with the Swift, you can extend your turns that way and just say, okay, you Flood Stream. There goes my, a couple of 2 drops. Okay, Leaf Wolf, still attacking, right? So now it's the, oh crap, I saved my Flood Stream because I thought that's all I needed to get out of this match. But if you're able to line up the Swift targets, that's not going to be good enough. So now you're able to have almost as fast as those white aggro turns, but then have a little bit of insurance kind of on the back end of saying, okay, I can hold a couple Swift cards, or I have the Ants Strike Back, that they have to use the Flood Stream first, then the Ants are going to come out, plus the Swift on top of that, right? So it's not as all in, but it's also then not as explosive as you might get with white aggro. Now, again, don't be wrong. There's going to be some turns where you're just like, vomit the butterflies, Thorn Person game. That's going to happen. That is how aggro decks work at the end of the day, right? But if you are wanting to play something that has a little bit more of a reach to it and a little bit more safer, arguably, if we know that a lot of people are going to be playing an increased amount of Flood Streams, then a green aggro with Swift package might actually be the better play over white aggro by just giving up 1 turn worth of speed for a little bit more resilience against the removal that we are expecting. And then, of course, Deadly Balance does largely nothing to these style of decks, but again, trying to end the game very, very quickly. And then because we have all the tap effects with the Aldeed, Koju, Thorn Prison, and Pincer, you are able to clear the way out of those problematic blockers that you might be expecting. Moving on from there, we have purple, which this is where we go into like just other decks that can still function very well because either how they attack the meta or just because they have enough consistency that says, well, if we're playing best of 1, I just want to dig through my cards as quick as possible to try to find those answers. And purple is probably going to still be the best at that, right? We have seen quite well how the purple deck can handle the Hydra, but it is a little bit weaker to the all-in aggro styles. So that's where we start to see double deadly, which would normally be pretty good overall in the meta because you want to do things like double deadly into Mirror Caster's ability to clear your opponent's board. Now you instead might want to drop like the core thefts for the Flood Streams, right? Or swap out some number of these 2. And that's going to then say, okay, am I expecting to play against more Hydra or am I expecting to play against more of the aggro side? However, again, thanks to like the Beldegor triggers coming back multiple times, we have a ton of draw effects listed. And then we also have Sanctuary, which then allows us to filter through our deck, right? There is always just a case for trying to pick the most consistent deck possible that is still very good into the format overall. And I think that is going to be purple by a mile in terms of like, okay, it's not Hydra, it's not the all-in aggro decks, kind of what's next and where I want to be. That is going to give me the best opportunity to win a best of one game, all things equal, right? So that's more of shifting the conversation from, okay, what are the high roll decks? With, again, Hydra still having some other game, to be fair, right? It's just still a very good ascend target. But then purple is the deck that says, okay, if we assume all things equal and we have an average game, sorry, I'm going to win 10 out of 10 times. Okay, maybe 99 out of 100, right? There's still going to be some room for variance there. But because you have so much draw, so much utility, so much value that you're getting just out of every single spirit, you're naturally going to see significantly more cards than your opponent, which again, in a best of one format, largely, most often will lead you to a win in the end. So Mirrorcaster is definitely one that I would expect that if you love purple, definitely make some considerations here of like, okay, where am I putting these flood streams I know that I need to play in some quantity, and how do I get there? Because again, otherwise, especially like, best boy, best lands, black lands, we all love him. Just getting the extra draw and then curse still just being really good right now is definitely something that I would want to be playing if I was more comfortable with purple. So again, I want to stress that I think the only deck that really loses a lot of steam, which I probably should have mentioned up front, is the white control decks. But honestly, everything else that we've seen so far in the meta, I think is still a reasonable choice for best of one, as long as you make those main deck changes that I have hinted at throughout this video. And then, of course, I got to give a special shout out to my boy Smag, because now this is something that we've seen that is quite good. We do have the Dream Bombs. We have the Star Blessed Draw for consistency, which again can be really good against purple. We have the Deadly Balances. What do we do from there? And it's kind of whatever you want. Now, we have seen the Ira top end, the Curse combo can still be really good, or if you just want to put Curse Dragons in general, if you know that you're going to be piloting against more aggressive strategies, then Curse Dragon is still going to be, the one card combo that gets you there a lot of times if they just have to play into it. So this is now where I love Smag, because it is a best of one format. And again, I put question marks on all of these because anytime that you go against Smag, and I guess maybe I should have copied out one of the ramp cores, right? Or at least the Beldegor. Probably should have filtered out 2 more. We know that there's maybe 8 cards that we can expect some number of 4-ofs, right? And then there's so much of the deck that is left that players can truly do whatever they want with. Smag itself just being a great enabler because it gives you the reduction you need. It's a Beldegor trigger, it gives you the ramp and draw, just quite literally does everything. And then also, special shout out to the Forest Guardian, who is also just great against aggro if they don't have the immediate answer for it, because you do get to tap down some other things while also allowing you to be aggressive. So I think Forest Guardian just in general remains a MVP in my heart. But again, it does come back to what does this really shift into, or what other pieces are we looking for to target the meta, knowing that we have to deal with both Hydra and the aggressive decks, which again, I think this just means you slide in some flood streams and then decide what you want to build with from there. I was looking into a couple cheeky, I guess I'm just going to call it blue Smag, and that's all I'm going to say for now, because I might actually play it in the event. I was looking into some blue cards that you can probably figure it out from there. And I'm like, oh, these actually work in this list and would be really good for this format. And I'm like, huh. But I don't want to test that out in a best of one format, so that might be another deck list for another video. But I truly love the Smag list, and I keep going back to it because, in my opinion, it's just super fun to play, and it has so much flexibility that by the time your opponent figures out what you're doing, it's probably too late for them to come back unless they hit a very specific sequence of cards. So this one is something that, if someone can, get a little lucky, find the right combination of cards, I do think it also has a very good chance of making it to that kind of top 8 breakdown. But again, I am very bluntly going to be expecting half Hydra, half aggro, just because it is best of one. And at the end of the day, it just takes a little bit of luck to get there. So that is a quick review of what to expect for the Summoner Duels, again, starting this weekend. And there's also more that are coming out or will be scheduled in July. Some of them are posted. I'm hearing some rumblings that there will be more added later. But if you haven't checked the page lately on Battle Spirit's website, definitely go check that out because there might have been an online event posted that you are able to join. So with that out of the way, what do you think about Best of One? Are you excited to play in the Summoner Duels series? I will say the prizing is much nicer, so that does make me feel a lot better about signing up for these. The Nexus are beautiful. I cannot wait to get the cores because they're gonna be great for online play as well. And I think, you know, I gotta give a huge shout here at the end to Bandai for listening to community feedback and making the prizing a lot better. And even if I don't like Best of One, I probably will be signing up for every single one of these events because the prizing is just great. So let me know what your thoughts are on Best of One and what you're excited to play for the tournament. And until then, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.